Hey folks, wow, so I guess it took longer than I thought to get back on the QuidPodQuo horse. And it took a series of illnesses, nothing serious, so don't worry, but a series of illnesses delaying our audio podcast, QuidPodQuo, to get me back on the video side. But here we go. Evil Dead 2013. Gotta say, when it was first announced, I didn't think that this remake was necessary. The original Evil Dead isn't perfect by any means, but it made its mark and it still resonates today. The original is a movie that if you consider yourself a fan of horror, you have to see. Not because you'll love it, but because it's part of the cultural lexicon for horror fans. That said, the remake isn't too bad, though the term remake barely fits. The scenario is the same. 5 kids, cabin in the woods, book bound in human flesh, inked in human blood that raises the demons. But that's also about where the similarities end. The reason the kids are in the woods and the initial reason they refuse to leave is much more believable for today's horror movie savvy audience, and the movie goes out of its way to try to swerve old and new fans alike as often as possible before the ending. I myself fell victim to at least one of those swerves. The gore is spot on for an Evil Dead movie, and the tension and pacing is much better than anything we had seen prior to it in the series. Even the extra ending we get after we assume everything is over didn't feel like an unwelcome lengthening of the movie. It felt like it fit. Now, I'm talking about an extra scene that felt like it came after everything was done, not the post-credit sequence. There is actually a post-credit sequence that is worth checking out if you're a fan of the originals. But that said, there were also some cool homages to not only the original Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, but also Army of Darkness. And the actors did a pretty decent job. Unfortunately, it didn't feel like it did enough to step into the same rarefied air as the original. Yes, the gore is not what today's horror fans may be used to seeing, but the ideas, if not the updated executions, are old hat to fans of 70s and 80s gore flicks. Also, as good as the acting is, the writing lets the actors down, because there's not a single iconic or memorable character in the entire film. They're all boilerplate horror movie fodder. And that may be fine for any other movie, but when you throw the gauntlet down and say you're making a remake of Evil Dead, you can't just take the gore and the scenario and be done with it. You have to acknowledge the fact that one of the major parts of the enduring success of the original Evil Dead trilogy is the fact that it birthed a character that became bigger than the series. Now, they may have, and by they I mean the producers on this one, Sam Raimi, Rob Tapert, and Bruce Campbell, who are all involved in the original series, they may have made a conscious decision to not have an iconic character in this one, so that the character of Ash from the original trilogy is kind of left on his own and is still a unique creature. But, come on, you gotta give me something. If this movie gets a sequel, which it most likely will, I don't really care about any of the characters in it. I don't want to see what happens to any of them necessarily. But that's enough about that. My final complaint, and this goes back to writing. And please, I say complaint, but realize none of my complaints are that serious. They're all mostly minor annoyances, and none of them should stop you from seeing the movie if you're interested in seeing it or if you're a fan of horror in general. But my final complaint is that while the movie sets up a more substantial plot in the first reel, that it all goes away by the time the possessions get started. One plot thread in particular annoyed me because they start something pretty good with 2 characters. They set up a nice little minor mystery, and you want to find out what these characters' intentions are towards each other, what's the reason behind certain things, and then poof, it's dropped. Just don't do that. If you're going to do that, just don't introduce it. The original Evil Dead had a threadbare plot, and that's fine. It also didn't leave anything hanging. But all that said, this is definitely worth your time if you're a fan of the original or if you're a fan of horror movies in general. Now, at the beginning of this review, you may have heard me mention that QuidPodQuo was delayed. QuidPodQuo is the husband and wife audio movie review podcast that I do, obviously with my wife. And if you want, please visit us at our website, QuidPodQuo.com. Listen to some of our prior episodes. In fact, last year we reviewed Evil Dead 2. Well, Justine reviewed it because I made her watch it for the first time. So if you want to see Justine's thoughts on that, please check that out. You can also follow us on Twitter at QuidPodQuo. Like us on Facebook, facebook.com/QuidPodQuo. Thanks, everybody.